Book 3, Chapter 10, Part 2 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Magdalena Cook. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 10, Part 2. I have been back some hours. I have been thinking, and nothing has come of it. Ever since I got that strange letter of Midwinter's last Sunday, my usual readiness in emergencies has deserted me. When I am not thinking of him or his story, my mind feels quite stupefied. I, who have always known what to do on other occasions, don't know what to do now. It would be easy enough, of course, to warn Major Milroy of his daughter's proceedings. But the Major is fond of his daughter. Armadale is anxious to be reconciled with him. Armadale is rich and prosperous, and ready to submit to the elder man, and sooner or later they will be friends again, and the marriage will follow. Warning Major Milroy is only the way to embarrass them for the present. It is not the way to part them for good and all. What is the way? I can't see it. I could tear my own hair off my head. I could burn the house down. If there was a train of gunpowder under the whole world, I could light it and blow the whole world to destruction. I am in such a rage, such a frenzy with myself for not seeing it. Poor dear Midwinter. Yes, dear. I don't care. I'm lonely and helpless. I want somebody who is gentle and loving to make much of me. I wish I had his head on my bosom again. I have a good mind to go to London and marry him. Am I mad? Yes, all people who are as miserable as I am are mad. I must go to the window and get some air. Shall I jump out? No, it disfigures one so, and the coroner's inquest lets so many people see it. The air has revived me. I begin to remember that I have time on my side, at any rate. Nobody knows but me of their secret meetings in the park the first thing in the morning. If jealous old Bashwood, who is slinking and sly enough for anything, tries to look privately after Armadale in his own interest, he will try at the usual time when he goes to the steward's office. He knows nothing of Miss Milroy's early habits, and he won't be on the spot till Armadale has got back to the house. For another week to come I may wait and watch them, and choose my own time and way of interfering, the moment I see a chance of his getting the better of her hesitation, and making her say yes. So here I wait, without knowing how things will end with Midwinter in London, with my purse getting emptier and emptier, and no appearance so far of any new pupils to fill it. With Mother Oldershaw certain to insist on having her money back the moment she knows I have failed. Without prospects, friends, or hopes of any kind, a lost woman, if ever there was a lost woman yet. Well, I say it again and again and again, I don't care. Here I stop. If I sell the clothes off my back, if I hire myself at the public house to play the brutes in the tap-room, here I stop till the time comes, and I see the way to parting Armadale and Miss Milroy for ever. 7 o'clock. Any signs that the time is coming yet? I hardly know. There are signs of a change, at any rate, in my position in the neighbourhood. Two of the oldest and ugliest of the many old and ugly ladies who took up my case when I left Major Milroy's service have just called, announcing themselves with the insufferable impudence of charitable Englishwomen as a deputation from my patroness. It seems that the news of my reconciliation with Armadale has spread from the servants' offices at the great house, and has reached the town, with this result. It is the unanimous opinion of my patroness, and the opinion of Major Milroy also, who has been consulted, that I have acted with the most inexcusable imprudence in going to Armadale's house, and in there speaking on friendly terms with a man whose conduct toward myself has made his name a byword in the neighbourhood. My total want of self-respect in this matter has given rise to a report that I am trading as clever as ever on my good looks, and that I am as likely as not to end in making Armadale marry me after all. My patronesses are of course too charitable to believe this. They merely feel it necessary to remonstrate with me in a Christian spirit, and to warn me that any second and similar imprudence on my part would force all my best friends in the plate to withdraw the countenance and protection which I now enjoy. Having addressed me, turn and turn about, in these terms, evidently all rehearsed beforehand, my two Gorgon visitors straightened themselves in their chairs, and looked at me as much as to say, You may often have heard of virtue, Miss Gwilt, but we don't believe you ever really saw it in full bloom till we came and called on you." Seeing they were bent on provoking me, I kept my temper and answered them in my smoothest, sweetest, and most ladylike manner. I have noticed that the Christianity of a certain class of respectable people begins when they open their prayer books at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and ends when they shut them up again at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Nothing so astonishes and insults Christians of this sort as reminding them of their Christianity on a weekday. On this hint, as the man says in the play, I spoke. "What have I done that is wrong?" I asked innocently. "Mr. Armadale has injured me, and I have been to his house and forgiven him the injury. Surely there must be some mistake, ladies. You can't have really come here to remonstrate with me in a Christian spirit for performing an act of Christianity." The two Gorgons got up. I firmly believe some women have cats' tails as well as cats' faces. I firmly believe the tails of those two particular cats wagged slowly under their petticoats, and swelled to 4 times their proper size. "Temper we were prepared for, Miss Gwilt," they said, "but not profanity. We wish you good evening." So they left me, and so Miss Gwilt sinks out of the patronising notice of the neighbourhood. I wonder what will come of this trumpery little quarrel. One thing will come of it which I can see already. The report will reach Miss Milroy's ears. She will insist on Armadale's justifying himself, and Armadale will end in satisfying her of his innocence by making another proposal. This will be quite likely to hasten matters between them. At least it would with me. If I was in her place, I should say to myself, I will make sure of him while I can. Supposing it doesn't rain tomorrow morning, I think I will take another early walk in the direction of the park. Midnight. As I can't take my drops with a morning walk before me, I may as well give up all hope of sleeping and go on with my diary. Even with my drops, I doubt if my head would be very quiet on my pillow tonight. Since the little excitement of the scene with my lady patronesses has worn off, I have been troubled with misgivings which would leave me but a poor chance, under any circumstances, of getting much rest. I can't imagine why, but the parting words spoken to Armadale by the old brute of a lawyer have come back to my mind. Here they are, as reported in Mr. Bashwood's letter. Some other person's curiosity may go on from the point where you and I have stopped, and some other person's hand may let the broad daylight in yet on Miss Gwilt. What does he mean by that? What did he mean afterward when he overtook old Bashwood in the drive? By telling him to gratify his curiosity? Does this hateful Pedgift actually suppose there is any chance? Ridiculous! Why, I have only to look at the feeble old creature, and he daren't lift his little finger unless I tell him. He try to pry into my past life, indeed! Why, people with 10 times his brains and 100 times his courage have tried, and have left off as wise as they began. I don't know, though. It might have been better if I had kept my temper when Bashwood was here the other night. And it might be better still if I saw him tomorrow, and took him back into my good graces by giving him something to do for me. Suppose I tell him to look after the 2 Pedgifts, and to discover whether there is any chance of their attempting to renew their connection with Armadale. No such thing is at all likely, but if I gave old Bashwood this commission, it would flatter his senses of his own importance to me, and would at the same time serve the excellent purpose of keeping him out of my way. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. I have just got back from the park. For once I have proved the true prophet. There they were together, at the same early hour, in the same secluded situation among the trees, and there was Miss in full possession of the report of my visit to the great house, and taking her tone accordingly. After saying 1 or 2 things about me, which I promise him not to forget, Armadale took the way to convince her of his constancy, which I felt beforehand he would be driven to take. He repeated his proposal of marriage with excellent effect this time. Tears and kisses and protestations followed, and my late pupil opened her heart at last, in the most innocent manner. Home, she confessed, was getting so miserable to her now that it was only less miserable than going to school. Her mother's temper was becoming more violent and unmanageable every day. The nurse, who was the only person with any influence over her, had gone away in disgust. Her father was becoming more and more immersed in his clock, and was made more and more resolute to send her away from home by the distressing scenes which now took place with her mother almost day by day. I waited through these domestic disclosures, on the chance of hearing any plans they might have for the future discussed between them, and my patience, after no small exercise of it, was rewarded at last. The first suggestion, as was only natural where such a fool as Armadale was concerned, came from the girl. She started an idea which I own I had not anticipated. She proposed that Armadale should write to her father, and cleverer still, she prevented all fear of his blundering by telling him what he was to say. He was to express himself as deeply distressed at his estrangement from the Major, and to request permission to call at the cottage, and say a few words in his own justification. That was all. The letter was not to be sent that day, for the applicants for the vacant place of Mrs. Milroy's nurse was coming, and seeing them and questioning them would put her father, with his dislike of such things, in no humour to receive Armadale's application indulgently. The Friday would be the day to send the letter, and on the Saturday morning, if the answer was unfortunately not favourable, they might meet again. I don't like deceiving my father. He has always been so kind to me, and there will be no need to deceive him, Allan, if we can only make you friends again. Those were the last words the little hypocrite said when I left them. What will Major do? Saturday morning will show. I won't think of it till Saturday morning has come and gone. They are not man and wife yet, and again I say it, though my brains are still as helpless as ever, man and wife they shall never be. On my way home again I caught Bashwood at his breakfast, with his poor old black teapot and his little penny loaf, and his one cheap morsel of oily butter, and his darned dirty tablecloth. It sickens me to think of it. I coaxed and comforted the miserable old creature till the tears stood in his eyes, and he quite blushed with pleasure. He undertakes to look after the Pedgifts with the utmost alacrity. Pedgift the elder he described, when once roused, as the most obstinate man living. Nothing will induce him to give way, unless Armadale gives way also on his side. Pedgift the younger is much more the likely of the two to make attempts at a reconciliation. Such, at least, is Bashwood's opinion. It is of very little consequence now what happens either way. The only important thing is to tie my elder admirer safely again to my apron string, and this is done. The post is late this morning. It has only just come in, and has brought me a letter from Midwinter. It is a charming letter. It flatters me and flutters me as if I was a young girl again. No reproaches for my never having written to him, no hateful hurrying of me, in plain words, to marry him. He only writes to tell me a piece of news. He has obtained, through his lawyer, a prospect of being employed as occasional correspondent to a newspaper, which is about to be started in London. The employment will require him to leave England for the Continent, which would exactly meet his own wishes for the future, but he cannot consider the proposal seriously until he has first ascertained whether it would meet my wishes too. He knows no will but mine, and he leaves me to decide, after first mentioning the time allowed him before his answer must be sent in. It is the time, of course, if I agree to his going abroad, in which I must marry him. But there is not a word about this in his letter. He asks for nothing but a sight of my handwriting to help him through the interval while we are separated from each other. That is the letter, not very long, but so prettily expressed. I think I can penetrate the secret of his fancy for going abroad. That wild idea of putting the mountains and the seas between Armadale and himself is still in his mind, as if either he or I could escape doing what we are fated to do, supposing we really are fated, by putting a few hundred or a few thousand miles between Armadale and ourselves. What strange absurdity and inconsistency! And yet how I like him for being absurd and inconsistent. For don't I see plainly that I am at the bottom of it all? Who leads this clever man astray in spite of himself? Who makes him too blind to see the contradiction in his own conduct, which he would see plainly in the conduct of another person? How interested I do feel in him! How dangerously near I am to shutting my eyes on the past, and letting myself love him! Was Eve fonder of Adam than ever, I wonder, after she had coaxed him into eating the apple? I should have quite doted on him if I had been in her place. Memorandum: to write Midwinter a charming little letter on my side, with a kiss in it, and as time is allowed him before he sends in his answer, to ask for time too, before I tell him whether I will or will not go abroad. 5 o'clock. A tiresome visit from my landlady, eager for a little gossip, and full of news which she thinks will interest me. She is acquainted, I find, with Mrs. Milroy's late nurse, and she has been seeing her friend off at the station this afternoon. They talked, of course, of affairs at the cottage, and my name found its way into the conversation. I am quite wrong, it seems, if the nurse's authority is to be trusted, in believing Miss Milroy to be responsible for sending Mr. Armadale to my reference in London. Miss Milroy really knew nothing about it, and it all originated in her mother's mad jealousy of me. The present wretched state of things at the cottage is due entirely to the same cause. Mrs. Milroy is firmly persuaded that my remaining at Thorpe Ambrose is referable to my having some private means of communicating with the Major which it is impossible for her to discover. With this conviction in her mind, she has become so unmanageable that no person with any chance of bettering herself could possibly remain in attending her, and sooner or later the Major, object to it as he may, will be obliged to place her under proper medical care. That is the sum and substance of what the wearisome lady had to tell me. Unnecessary to say that I was not in the least interested by it. Even if the nurse's assertion is to be depended on, which I persist in doubting, it is of no importance now. I know that Miss Milroy, and nobody but Miss Milroy, has utterly ruined my prospect of becoming Mrs. Armadale of Thorpe Ambrose. I care to know nothing more. If her mother was really alone in the attempt to expose my false reference, her mother seems to be suffering for it, at any rate. And so good-bye to Mrs. Milroy, and heaven defend me from any more last glimpses at the cottage seen through the medium of my landlady's spectacles. 9 o'clock. Bashwood has just left me, having come with news from the great house. Pedgift the younger has made his attempt at bringing about a reconciliation this very day, and has failed. I am the sole cause of the failure. Armadale is quite willing to be reconciled if Pedgift the elder will avoid all future occasion of disagreement between them by never recurring to the subject of Miss Gwilt. This, however, happens to be exactly the condition which Pedgift's father, with his opinion of me and my doings, should consider it his duty to Armadale not to accept. So lawyer and client remain as far apart as ever, and the obstacle of the Pedgifts is cleared out of my way. It might have been a very awkward obstacle, so far as Pedgift the elder is concerned, if one of his suggestions had been carried out. I mean, if an officer of the London police had been brought down here to look at me. It is a question, even now, whether I had better not take to the thick veil again, which I always wear in London and other large places. The only difficulty is that it would excite remark in this inquisitive little town to see me wearing a thick veil, for the first time in summer weather. It is close on 10 o'clock. I have been dawdling over my diary longer than I supposed. No words can describe how weary and languid I feel. Why don't I take my sleeping drops and go to bed? There is no meeting between Armadale and Miss Milroy to force me into early rising tomorrow morning. Am I trying, for the 100th time, to see my way clearly into the future, trying, in my present state of fatigue, to be the quick-witted woman I once was, before all these anxieties came together and overpowered me? Or am I perversely afraid of my bed when I want it most? I don't know. I am tired and miserable. I am looking wretchedly haggard and old. With a little encouragement, I might be fool enough to burst out crying. Luckily, there is no one to encourage me. What sort of a night is it, I wonder? A cloudy night, with the moon showing at intervals, and the wind rising. I can just hear it moaning the ins and outs of the unfinished cottages at the end of the street. My nerves must be a little shaken, I think. I was startled just now by a shadow on the wall. It was only after a moment or two that I mustered sense enough to notice where the candle was, and to see that the shadow was my own. Shadows remind me of Midwinter, or, if the shadows don't, something else does. I must have another look at his letter, and then I will positively go to bed. I shall end in getting fond of him, if I remain much longer in this lonely, uncertain state. So irresolute, so unlike my usual self, I shall end in getting fond of him. What madness! As if I could ever be really fond of a man again. Suppose I took one of my sudden resolutions and married him. Poor as he is, he would give me a name and a position if I became his wife. Let me see how the name, his own name, would look if I really did consent to it for mine. Mrs. Armadale. Pretty. Mrs. Allan Armadale. Prettier still. My nerves must be shaken. Here is my own handwriting startling me now. It is so strange, it is enough to startle anybody. The similarity in the two names never struck me in this light before. Marry which of the two I might, my name would, of course, be the same. I should have been Mrs. Armadale if I had married the light-haired Allan at the great house, and I can be Mrs. Armadale still if I marry the dark-haired Allan in London. It's almost maddening to write it down, to feel that something ought to come of it, and to find nothing come. How can anything come of it? If I did go to London and marry him, as of course I must marry him under his real name, would he let me be known by it afterward? With all his reasons for concealing his real name, he would insist. No, he is too fond of me to do that. He would entreat me to take the name which he has assumed. Mrs. Midwinter. Hideous. Ozias, too, when I wanted to address him familiarly, as his wife should. Worse than hideous. And yet there would be some reason for humouring him in this if he asked me. Suppose the brute at the great house happened to leave this neighbourhood as a single man, and suppose in his absence any of the people who know him heard of a Mrs. Allan Armadale. They would set her down at once as his wife, even if they actually saw me, if I actually came among them with that name, and if he was not present to contradict it. His own servants would be the first to say, "We knew she would marry him after all." And my lady patronesses, who will be ready to believe anything of me now we have quarrelled, would join the chorus, sotto voce. Only think, my dear, the report that so shocked us actually turns out to be true. No, if I marry Midwinter, I must either be perpetually putting my husband and myself in a false position, or I must leave his real name, his pretty romantic name, behind me at the church door. My husband! As if I was really going to marry him. I am not going to marry him, and there's an end of it. 10:30. Oh dear, how my temples throb, and how hot my weary eyes feel. There is the moon looking at me through the window. How fast the little scattered clouds are flying before the wind. Now they let the moon in, and now they shut the moon out. What strange shapes the patches of yellow light take, and lose again, all in a moment. No peace and quiet for me, look where I may. The candles keep flickering, and the very sky itself is restless tonight. To bed, as Lady Macbeth says. I wonder, by the by, what Lady Macbeth would have done in my position. She would have killed somebody when her difficulties first began, probably Armadale. Friday morning. A night's rest, thanks again to my drops. I went to breakfast in better spirits, and received a morning welcome in the shape of a letter from Mrs. Oldershaw. My silence has produced its effect on Mother Jezebel. She attributes it to the right cause, and she shows her claws at last. If I am not in a position to pay my note of hand for £30, which is due on Tuesday next, her lawyer is instructed to take the usual course. If I am not in a position to pay it. Why, when I have settled to-day with my landlord, I shall have barely £5 left. There is not the shadow of a prospect between now and Tuesday of my earning any money, and I don't possess a friend in this place who would trust me with sixpence. The difficulties that are swarming round me wanted but one more to complete them, and that one has come. Midwinter would assist me, of course, if I could bring myself to ask him for assistance, but that means marrying him. Am I really desperate enough and helpless enough to end it in that way? No, not yet. My head feels heavy. I must get out into the fresh air and think about it. 2 o'clock. I believe I have caught the infection of Midwinter's superstition. I begin to think that events are forcing me nearer and nearer to some end which I don't see yet, but which I am firmly persuaded is now not far off. I have been insulted, deliberately insulted before witness, by Miss Milroy. After walking, as usual, in the most unfrequented place I could pick out, and after trying, not very successfully, to think to some good purpose of what I am to do next, I remembered that I needed some note paper and pens, and went back to town to the stationer's shop. It might have been wiser to have sent for what I wanted, but I was weary of myself and weary of my lonely rooms, and I did not own errand, for no better reason than that it was something to do. I had just got into the shop and was asking for what I wanted, when another customer came in. We both looked up and recognized each other at the same moment. Miss Milroy. End of Chapter 10, Part 2.
The third, Chapter 10, Part 3 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Book the Third, Chapter 10, Part 3. A woman and a lad were behind the counter, besides the man who was serving me. The woman civilly addressed the new customer. "What can we have the pleasure of doing for you, miss?" After pointing at first by looking me straight in the face, she answered, "Nothing, thank you, at present. I'll come back when the shop is empty." She went out. The three people in the shop looked at me in silence. In silence, on my side, I paid for my purchases and left the place. I don't know how I might have felt if I had been in my usual spirits. In the anxious, unsettled state I am in now, I can't deny it, the girl stung me. In the weakness of the moment, for it was nothing else, I was on the point of matching her petty spitefulness by spitefulness quite as petty on my side. I had actually got as far as the whole length of the street, on my way to the major's cottage, bent on telling him the secret of his daughter's morning walks, before my better sense came back to me. When I did cool down, I turned round at once, and took the way home. No, no, Miss Milroy, mere temporary mischief-making at the cottage, which would only end in your father forgiving you, and in Armadale profiting by his indulgence, will nothing like pay the debt I owe you. I don't forget that your heart is set on Armadale, and that the major, however he may talk, has always ended hitherto in giving you your own way. My head may be getting duller and duller, but it has not quite failed me yet. In the meantime, there is Mother Oldershaw's letter waiting obstinately to be answered, and here am I not knowing what to do about it yet. Shall I answer it or not? It doesn't matter for the present. There are some hours still to spare before the post goes out. Suppose I asked Armadale to lend me the money. I should enjoy getting something out of him, and I believe, in his present situation with Miss Milroy, he would do anything to be rid of me. Mean enough, this, on my part. Pooh! When you hate and despise a man, as I hate and despise Armadale, who cares for looking mean in his eyes? And yet my pride, or something else, I don't know what, shrinks from it. 2:30. Only 2:30. Oh, the dreadful weariness of these long summer days! I can't keep thinking and thinking any longer. I must do something to relieve my mind. Can I go to my piano? No, I'm not fit for it. Work? No, I shall get thinking again if I take to my needle. A man in my place would find refuge in drink. I am not a man, and I can't drink. I'll dawdle over my dresses, and put my things tidy. Has an hour passed? More than an hour. It seems like a minute. I can't look back through these leaves, but I know I wrote somewhere that I felt myself getting nearer and nearer to some end that was still hidden from me. The end is hidden no longer. The cloud is off my mind. The blindness has gone from my eyes. I see it. I see it. It came to me. I never sought it. If I was lying on my deathbed, I could swear, with a safe conscience, I never sought it. I was only looking over my things. I was as idly and as frivolously employed as the most idle and most frivolous woman living. I went through my dresses and my linen. What could be more innocent? Children go through their dresses and their linen. It was such a long summer day, and I was so tired of myself. I went to my boxes next. I looked over the large box first, which I usually leave open, and then I tried the small box, which I always keep locked. From one thing to the other, I came at last to the bundle of letters at the bottom, the letters of the man for whom I once sacrificed and suffered everything, the man who has made me what I am. 100 times I had determined to burn his letters, but I have never burned them. This time all I said was, I won't read his letters, and I did read them. The villain! The false, cowardly, heartless villain! What have I to do with his letters now? Oh, the misery of being a woman! Oh, the meanness that our memory of a man can tempt us to, when our love for him is dead and gone! I read the letters. I was so lonely and so miserable, I read the letters. I came to the last, the letter he wrote to encourage me when I hesitated as the terrible time came nearer and nearer, the letter that revived me when my resolution failed at the 11th hour. I read on, line after line, till I came to these words: I really have no patience with such absurdities as you have written to me. You say I am driving you on to do what is beyond a woman's courage. Am I? I might refer you to any collection of trials, English or foreign, to show you that you are utterly wrong; but such collections may be beyond your reach, and I will only refer you to a case in yesterday's newspaper. The circumstances are totally different from our circumstances, but the example of resolution in a woman is an example worth your notice. You will find among the law reports a married woman charged with fraudulently representing herself to be the missing widow of an officer in the merchant service, who was supposed to have been drowned. The name of the prisoner's husband, living, and the name of the officer, a very common one, both as to Christian and surname, happened to be identically the same. There was money to be got by it, sorely wanted by the prisoner's husband, to whom she was devotedly attached, if the fraud had succeeded. The woman took it all on herself. Her husband was hapless and ill, and the bailiffs were after him. The circumstances, as you may read for yourself, were all in her favor, and were so well managed by her that the lawyers themselves acknowledged she might have succeeded if the supposed drowned man had not turned up alive and well in the nick of time to confront her. The scene took place at the lawyer's office, and came out in the evidence at the police court. The woman was handsome, and the sailor was a good-natured man. He wanted at first, if the lawyers would have allowed him, to let her off. He said to her, among other things, "You didn't count on the drowned man coming back alive and hearty, did you, ma'am?" "It was lucky for you," she said. "I didn't count on it. You escaped the sea, but you wouldn't have escaped me." "Why, what would you have done, if you had known I was coming back?" says the sailor. She looked him steadily in the face, and answered, "I would have killed you." There! Do you think such a woman as that would have written to tell me I was pressing her further than she had courage to go? A handsome woman, too, like yourself. You would drive some men in my position to wish they had her now in your place. I read no further. When I had got on, line by line, to those words, it burst on me like a flash of lightning. In an instant I saw it as plainly as I see it now. It is horrible. It is unheard of. It outdares all daring. But if I can only nerve myself to face one terrible necessity, It is to be done. I may personate the richly provided widow of Allan Armadale of Thorpe Ambrose, if I can count on Allan Armadale's death in a given time. There, in plain words, is the frightful temptation under which I now feel myself sinking. It is frightful in more ways than one, for it has come straight out of that other temptation to which I yielded in the bygone time. Yes, there the letter has been waiting for me in my box, to serve a purpose never thought of by the villain who wrote it. There is the case, as he called it, only quoted to taunt me, utterly unlike my own case at the time. There it has been, waiting and lurking for me through all the changes in my life, till it has come to be like my case at last. It might startle any woman to see this, and even this is not the worst. The whole thing has been in my diary for days past without my knowing it. Every idle fancy that escaped me has been tending secretly that one way, and I never saw, never suspected it, till the reading of the letter put my own thoughts before me in a new light, till I saw the shadow of my own circumstances suddenly reflected in one special circumstance of that other woman's case. It is to be done, if I can but look the necessity in the face. It is to be done, if I can count on Allan Armadale's death in a given time. All but his death is easy. The whole series of events under which I have been blindly chafing and fretting for more than a week past have been, one and all, though I was too stupid to see it, events in my favor, events paving the way smoothly and more smoothly straight to the end. In 3 bold steps, only 3, that end might be reached. Let Midwinter marry me privately, under his real name. Step the first. Let Armadale leave Thorpe Ambrose a single man, and die in some distant place among strangers. Step the second. Why am I hesitating? Why not go on to step the third and last? I will go on. Step the third and last is my appearance after the announcement of Armadale's death has reached this neighborhood, in the character of Armadale's widow, with my marriage certificate in my hand to prove my claim. It is as clear as the sun at noonday, thanks to the exact similarity between the 2 names, and thanks to the careful manner in which the secret of that similarity has been kept. I may be the wife of the dark Allan Armadale, known as such to nobody but my husband and myself, and I may, out of that very position, claim the character of widow of the light Allan Armadale, with proof to support me, in the shape of my marriage certificate, which would be proof in the estimation of the most incredulous person living. To think of my having put all this in my diary, to think of my having actually contemplated this very situation, and having seen nothing more in it at the time than a reason, if I married Midwinter, for consenting to appear in the world under my husband's assumed name. What is it daunts me? The dread of obstacles? The fear of discovery? Where are the obstacles? Where is the fear of discovery? I am actually suspected all over the neighborhood of intriguing to be mistress of Thorpe Ambrose. I am the only person who knows the real turn that Armadale's inclinations have taken. Not a creature but myself is as yet aware of his early morning meetings with Miss Milroy. If it is necessary to part them, I can do it at any moment by an anonymous line to the major. If it is necessary to remove Armadale from Thorpe Ambrose, I can get him away at 3 days' notice. His own lips informed me, when I last spoke to him, that he would go to the ends of the earth to be friends again with Midwinter, if Midwinter would let him. I have only to tell Midwinter to write from London and ask to be reconciled, and Midwinter would obey me, and to London Armadale would go. Every difficulty at starting is smoothed over, ready to my hand. Every after difficulty I could manage for myself. In the whole venture, desperate as it looks, to pass myself off for the widow of one man, while I am all the while the wife of the other, there is absolutely no necessity that wants twice considering, but the one terrible necessity of Armadale's death. His death. It might be a terrible necessity to any other woman, but ought it to be terrible to me? I hate him for his mother's sake. I hate him for his own sake. I hate him for going to London behind my back, and making inquiries about me. I hate him for forcing me out of my situation before I wanted to go. I hate him for destroying all my hopes of marrying him, and throwing me back helpless on my own miserable life. But oh, after what I have done already in the past time, how can I? How can I? The girl, too. The girl who has come between us, who has taken him away from me, who has openly insulted me this very day. How the girl whose heart is set on him would feel if he died. What a vengeance on her if I did it! And when I was received as Armadale's widow, what a triumph for me! Triumph! It is more than triumph. It is the salvation of me. A name that can't be assailed, a station that can't be assailed, to hide myself in from my past life. Comfort, luxury, wealth, an income of 1,200 a year, secured to me, secured by a will which has been looked at by a lawyer, secured independently of anything Armadale can say or do himself. I never had 1,200 a year. At my luckiest time I never had half as much, really my own. What have I got now? Just £5 left in the world, and the prospect, next week, of a debtor's prison. But oh, after what I have done already in the past time, how can I? How can I? Some women in my place, and with my recollections to look back on, would feel differently. Some women would say, "It's easier the second time than the first." Why can't I? Why can't I? Oh, you devil tempting me, is there no angel near to raise some timely obstacle between this and tomorrow, which might help me give it up? I shall sink under it. I shall sink if I write or think of it any more. I'll shut up these leaves and go out again. I'll get some common person to come with me, and we will talk of common things. I'll take out the woman of the house and her children. We will go and see something. There is a show of some kind in the town. I'll treat them to it. I'm not such an ill-natured woman when I try, and the landlady has really been kind to me. Surely I might occupy my mind a little in seeing her and her children enjoying themselves. A minute since I shut up these leaves as I said I would, and now I have opened them again. I don't know why. I think my brain is turned. I feel as if something was lost out of my mind. I feel as if I ought to find it here. I have found it. Midwinter. Is it possible that I can have been thinking of the reasons for and against for an hour past, writing Midwinter's name over and over again, speculating seriously on marrying him, and all the time not once remembering that even with every other impediment removed, he alone, when the time came, would be an insurmountable obstacle in the way? Has the effort to face the consideration of Armadale's death absorbed me to that degree? I suppose it has. I can't account for such extraordinary forgetfulness on my part in any other way. Shall I stop and think it out as I have thought out all the rest? Shall I ask myself if the obstacle of Midwinter would, after all, when the time came, be the unmanageable obstacle that it looks at present. No, what need is there to think of it? I have made up my mind to get the better of the temptation. I have made up my mind to give my landlady and her children a treat. I have made up my mind to close my diary, and closed it shall be. 6 o'clock. The landlady's gossip is unendurable. The landlady's children distract me. I have left them to run back here before post time and write a line to Mrs. Oldershaw. The dread that I shall sink under the temptation has grown stronger and stronger on me. I have determined to put it beyond my power to have my own way and follow my own will. Mother Oldershaw shall be the salvation of me for the first time since I have known her. If I can't pay my note of hand, she threatens me with an arrest. Well, she shall arrest me. In the state my mind is in now, the best thing that can happen to me is to be taken away from Thorpe Ambrose, whether I like it or not. I will write and say that I am to be found here. I will write and tell her, in so many words, that the best service she can render me is to lock me up. 7 o'clock. The letter has gone to the post. I had begun to feel a little easier, when the children came in to thank me for taking them to the show. One of them is a girl, and the girl upset me. She is a forward child, and her hair is nearly the color of mine. She said, "I shall be like you when I have grown bigger, shan't I?" Her idiot of a mother said, "Please excuse her, miss," and took her out of the room, laughing. Like me! I don't pretend to be fond of the child, but think of her being like me! Saturday morning. I have done well for once in acting on impulse, and writing as I did to Mrs. Oldershaw. The only new circumstance that has happened is another circumstance in my favor. Major Milroy has answered Armadale's letter, entreating permission to call at the cottage and justify himself. His daughter read it in silence when Armadale handed it to her at their meeting this morning in the park. But they talked about it afterward, loud enough for me to hear them. The major persists in the course he has taken. He says his opinion of Armadale's conduct has been formed, not on common report, but on Armadale's own letters, and he sees no reason to alter the conclusion at which he arrived when the correspondence between them was closed. This little matter had, I confessed, slipped out of my memory. It might have ended awkward for me, if Major Milroy had been less obstinately wedded to his own opinion. Armadale might have justified himself, the marriage engagement might have been acknowledged, and all my power of influencing the matter might have been at an end. As it is, they must continue to keep the engagement strictly secret, and Miss Milroy, who has never ventured herself near the great house since the thunderstorm forced her into it for shelter, will be less likely than ever to venture there now. I can part them when I please, with an anonymous line to the major. I can part them when I please. After having discussed the letter, the talk between them turned on what they were to do next. Major Milroy's severity, as it soon appeared, produced the usual results. Armadale returned to the subject of the elopement, and this time she listened to him. There is everything to drive her to it. Her outfit of clothes is nearly ready, and the summer holidays, at the school which has been chosen for her, end at the end of next week. When I left them, they had decided to meet again and settle something on Monday. The last words I heard him address to her, before I went away, shook me a little. He said, "There is one difficulty, Neelie, that needn't trouble us, at any rate. I have got plenty of money." And then he kissed her. The way to his life began to look an easier way to me when he talked of his money and kissed her. Some hours have passed, and the more I think of it, the more I fear the blank interval between this time and the time when Mrs. Oldershaw calls in the law and protects me against myself. It might have been better if I had stopped at home this morning. But how could I, after the insult she offered me yesterday? I tingled all over to go and look at her. To-day, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. They can't arrest me for the money before Wednesday, and my miserable £5 are dwindling to 4. And he told her he had plenty of money, and she blushed and trembled when he kissed her. It might have been better for him, better for her, and better for me, if my debt had fallen due yesterday, and if the bailiffs had their hands on me at this moment. Suppose I had the means of leaving Thorpe Ambrose by the next train, and going somewhere abroad, and absorbing myself in some new interest among new people. Could I do it, rather than look again at that easy way to his life, which would smooth the way to everything else? Perhaps I might. But where is the money to come from? Surely some way of getting it struck me a day or two since. Yes, that mean idea of asking Armadale to help me. Well, I will be mean for once. I'll give him the chance of making a generous use of that well-filled purse which it is such a comfort to him to reflect on in his present circumstances. It would soften my heart toward any man if he lent me money in my present extremity, and if Armadale lends me money, it might soften my heart toward him. When shall I go? At once? I won't give myself time to feel the degradation of it, and to change my mind. 3 o'clock. I mark the hour. He has sealed his own doom. He has insulted me. Yes, I have suffered it once from Miss Milroy, and I have now suffered it a second time from Armadale himself. An insult, a marked, merciless, deliberate insult, in the open day. I had got through the town, and had advanced a few hundred yards along the road that leads to the great house, when I saw Armadale at a little distance coming toward me. He was walking fast, evidently with some errand of his own to take him to the town. The instant he caught sight of me he stopped, colored up, took off his hat, hesitated, and turned aside down a lane behind him, which I happened to know would take him exactly in the contrary direction to the direction in which he was walking when he first saw me. His conduct said in so many words, "Miss Milroy may hear of it. I daren't run the risk of being seen speaking to you. Men have used me heartlessly. Men have done and said hard things to me, but no man living ever yet treated me as if I was plague struck, and as if the very air about me was infected by my presence. I say no more. When he walked away from me down that lane, he walked to his death. I have written to Midwinter to expect me in London next week, and to be ready for our marriage soon afterward. 4 o'clock. Half an hour since I put on my bonnet to go out and post the letter to Midwinter myself, and here I am, still in my room, with my mind torn by doubts, and my letter on the table. Armadale counts for nothing in the perplexities that are now torturing me. It is Midwinter that makes me hesitate. Can I take the first of those 3 steps that lead to the end without the common caution of looking at consequences? Can I marry Midwinter without knowing beforehand how to meet the obstacle of my husband when the time comes which transforms me from the living Armadale's wife to the dead Armadale's widow? Why can't I think of it, when I know I must think of it? Why can't I look at it steadily as I have looked at all the rest? I feel his kisses on my lips. I feel his tears on my bosom. I feel his arms around me again. He is far away in London, and yet he is here, and won't let me think of it. Why can't I wait a little? Why can't I let time help me? Time! It's Saturday. What need is there to think of it, unless I like? There is no post to London to-day. I must wait. If I posted the letter, it wouldn't go. Besides, to-morrow I may hear from Mrs. Oldershaw. I ought to wait to hear from Mrs. Oldershaw. I can't consider myself a free woman till I know what Mrs. Oldershaw means to do. There is a necessity for waiting till to-morrow. I shall take my bonnet off, and lock the letter up in my desk. Sunday morning. There is no resisting it. One after another the circumstances crowd on me. They come thicker and thicker, and they all force me one way. I have got Mother Oldershaw's answer. The wretch fawns on me, and cringes to me. I can see, as plainly as if she had acknowledged it, that she suspects me of seeing my own way to success at Thorpe Ambrose without her assistance. Having found threatening me useless, she tries coaxing me now. I am her darling Lydia again. She is quite shocked that I could imagine that she ever really intended to arrest her bosom friend, and she has only to entreat me, as a favor to herself, to renew the bill. I say once more, no mortal creature could resist it. Time after time I have tried to escape the temptation, and time after time the circumstances drive me back again. I can struggle no longer. The post that takes the letters to-night shall take my letter to Midwinter among the rest. To-night! If I give myself till to-night, something else may happen. If I give myself till to-night, I may hesitate again. I'm weary of the torture of hesitating. I must and will have relief in the present, cost what it may in the future. My letter to Midwinter will drive me mad if I see it staring and staring at me in my desk any longer. I can post it in 10 minutes' time, and I will. It is done. The first of the 3 steps that leads me to the end is a step taken. My mind is quieter. The letter is in the post. By to-morrow Midwinter will receive it. Before the end of the week Armadale must be publicly seen to leave Thorpe Ambrose, and I must be publicly seen to leave with him. Have I looked at the consequences of my marriage to Midwinter? No. Do I know how to meet the obstacle of my husband when the time comes which transforms me from the living Armadale's wife to the dead Armadale's widow? No. When the time comes, I must meet the obstacle as best I may. I am going blindfold, then, so far as Midwinter is concerned, into this frightful risk? Yes, blindfold. Am I out of my senses? Very likely. Or am I a little too fond of him to look the thing in the face? I dare say. Who cares? I won't think of it. Haven't I a will of my own, and can't I think, if I like, of something else? Here is Mother Jezebel's cringing letter. That is something else to think of. I'll answer it. I am in a fine humor for writing to Mother Jezebel. Conclusion of Miss Gwilt's letter to Mrs. Oldershaw. I told you, when I broke off, that I would wait before I finished this, and asked my diary if I could safely tell you what I have now got it in my mind to do. Well, I have asked, and my diary says, "Don't tell her." Under these circumstances I close my letter, with my best excuses for leaving you in the dark. I shall probably be in London before long, and I may tell you by word of mouth what I don't think it safe to write here. Mind, I make no promise. It all depends on how I feel toward you at the time. I don't doubt your discretion, but, under certain circumstances, I am not so sure of your courage. L.G. P.S. My best thanks for your permission to renew the bill. I decline profiting by the proposal. The money will be ready when the money is due. I have a friend now in London who will pay it if I ask him. Do you wonder who the friend is? You will wonder at one or two other things, Mrs. Oldershaw, before many weeks more are over your head and mine. End of Book the Third, Chapter 10. Book the Third, Chapter 11 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Book the Third, Chapter 11. Love and Law. On the morning of Monday, the 28th of July, Miss Gwilt, once more on the watch for Allan and Neelie, reached her customary post of observation in the park by the usual roundabout way. She was a little surprised to find Neelie alone at the place of meeting. She was more seriously astonished, when the tardy Allan made his appearance 10 minutes later, to see him mounting the side of the dell with a large volume under his arm, and to hear him say, as an apology for being late, that he had muddled away his time in hunting for the books, and that he had only found one, after all, which seemed in the least likely to repay either Neelie or himself for the trouble of looking into it. If Miss Gwilt had waited long enough in the park on the previous Saturday to hear the lovers' parting words on that occasion, she would have been at no loss to explain the mystery of the volume under Allan's arm, and she would have understood the apology which he now offered for being late as readily as Neelie herself. There is a certain exceptional occasion in life, the occasion of marriage, on which even girls in their teens sometimes become capable, more or less hysterically, of looking at consequences. At the farewell moment of the interview on Saturday, Neelie's mind had suddenly precipitated itself into the future, and she had utterly confounded Allan by inquiring whether the contemplated elopement was an offense punishable by the law. Her memory satisfied her that she had certainly read somewhere, at some former period, in some book or other, possibly a novel, of an elopement with a dreadful end, of the bride dragged home in hysterics, and of a bridegroom sentenced to languish in prison with all his beautiful hair cut off, by act of Parliament, close to his head. Supposing she could bring herself to consent to the elopement at all, which she positively declined to promise, she must first insist on discovering whether there was any fear of the police being concerned in her marriage, as well as the parson and the clerk. Allan, being a man, ought to know, and to Allan she looked for information. With this preliminary assurance to assist him in laying down the law, that she would die of a broken heart 1,000 times over, rather than be the innocent means of sending him to languish in prison, and of cutting his hair off by act of Parliament close to his head. "It's no laughing matter," said Neelie, resolutely, in conclusion. "I decline even to think of our marriage till my mind is made easy first on the subject of the law." "But I don't know anything about the law, not even as much as you do," said Allan. "Hang the law! I don't mind my head being cropped. Let's risk it." "Risk it?" repeated Neelie, indignantly. "Have you no consideration for me? I won't risk it. Where there's a will there's a way. We must find out the law for ourselves." "With all my heart," said Allan. "How?" "Out of books, to be sure. There must be quantities of information in that enormous library of yours at the great house. If you really love me, you won't mind going over the backs of a few thousand books for my sake." "I'll go over the backs of 10,000," cried Allan, warmly. "Would you mind telling me what I'm looking for?" "For law, to be sure. When it says law on the back, open it, and look inside for marriage. Read every word of it, and then come here and explain it to me." "What! You don't think your head is to be trusted to do such a simple thing as that?" "I'm certain it isn't," said Allan. "Can't you help me?" "Of course I can, if you can't manage without me. Law may be hard, but it can't be harder than music. And I must and will satisfy my mind. Bring me all the books you can find, on Monday morning, in a wheelbarrow, if there are a good many of them, and if you can't manage it any other way." The result of this conversation was Allan's appearance in the park, with a volume of Blackstone's Commentaries under his arm, on the fatal Monday morning when Miss Gwilt's written engagement of marriage was placed in Midwinter's hands. Here again, in this, as in all other human instances, the widely discordant elements of the grotesque and the terrible were forced together by that subtle law of contrast which is one of the laws of mortal life. Amid all the thickening complications now impending over their heads, with the shadow of meditated murder stealing toward one of them already from the lurking place that hid Miss Gwilt, the two sat down unconscious of the future, with the book between them, and applied themselves to the study of the law of marriage, with a grave resolution to understand it, which, in two such students, was nothing less than a burlesque in itself. "Find the place," said Neelie, as soon as they were comfortably established. "We must manage this by what they call division of labor. You shall read, I'll take notes." She produced forthwith a smart little pocket book in pencil, and opened the book in the middle, where there was a blank page on the right hand and the left. At the top of the right hand page she wrote the word "good." At the top of the left hand page she wrote the word "bad." "Good means where the law is on our side," she explained, "and bad means where the law is against us. We will have good and bad opposite each other, all down the 2 pages, and when we get to the bottom we'll add them up, and act accordingly. They say girls have no heads for business. Haven't they? Don't look at me, look at Blackstone, and begin." "Would you mind giving me a kiss first?" asked Allan. "I should mind it very much. In our serious situation, when we have both got to exert our intellects, I wonder you can ask for such a thing." "That's why I asked for it," said the unblushing Allan. "I feel as if it would clear my head." "Oh, if it would clear your head, that's quite another thing. I must clear your head, of course, at any sacrifice. Only one, mind," she whispered coquettishly, "and pray be careful of Blackstone, or you'll lose the place." There was a pause in the conversation. Blackstone and the pocket book both rolled on the ground together. "If this happens again," said Neelie, picking up the pocket book with her eyes and her complexion at their brightest and best, "I shall sit with my back to you for the rest of the morning. Will you go on?" Allan found his place for the second time, and fell headlong into the bottomless abyss of English law. "Page 280," he began. "Law of husband and wife. Here's a bit I don't understand, to begin with. It may be observed generally that the law considers marriage in the light of a contract. What does that mean? I thought a contract was the sort of thing a builder signs when he promises to have the workmen out of the house in a given time, and when the time comes, as my poor mother used to say, the workmen never go." "Is there nothing about love?" asked Neelie. "Look a little lower down." "Not a word. He sticks to his confounded contract all the way through." "Then he's a brute. Go on to something else that's more in our way." "Here's a bit that's more in our way. Incapacities. If any persons under legal incapacities come together, it is a meretricious and not a matrimonial union. Blackstone's a good one for long words, isn't he? I wonder what he means by meretricious. The first of these legal disabilities is a prior marriage, and having another husband or wife living." "Stop," said Neelie. "I must make a note of that." she gravely made her first entry on the page headed Good, as follows: "I have no husband, and Allan has no wife. We are both entirely unmarried at the present time." "All right, so far," remarked Allan, looking over her shoulder. "Go on," said Neelie. "What next?" "The next disability," proceeded Allan, "is want of age. The age for consent to matrimony is 14 in males and 12 in females." "Come!" cried Allan, cheerfully. "Blackstone begins early enough, at any rate." Nelly was too businesslike to make any other remark, on her side, than the necessary remark in the pocket-book. She made another entry under the head of Good. "I am old enough to consent, and so is Allan too." "Go on," resumed Neelie, looking over the reader's shoulder. "Never mind all that prosing of Blackstone's, about the husband being of years of discretion, and the wife under 12. Abominable wretch! The wife under 12! Skip to the third incapacity, if there is one." "The third incapacity," Allan went on, "is want of reason." Neelie immediately made a third entry on the side of Good. "Allan and I are both perfectly reasonable." Skip to the next page. Allan skipped. "A fourth incapacity is in respect of proximity of relationship." A fourth entry followed instantly on the cheering side of the pocket-book. "He loves me, and I love him, without our being in the slightest degree related to each other." "Any more?" asked Neelie, tapping her chin impatiently with the end of the pencil. "Plenty more," rejoined Allan, "all in hieroglyphics. Look here: Marriage Acts 4 Go 4 C 76, and 6 and 7 Will 4 C 85 Q. Blackstone's intellect seems to be wandering here. Shall we take another skip, and see if he picks himself up again on the next page?" "Wait a little," said Neelie. "What's that I see in the middle?" She read for a minute in silence over Allan's shoulder, and suddenly clasped her hands in despair. "I knew I was right!" she exclaimed. "Oh, heavens, here it is!" "Where?" asked Allan. "I see nothing about languishing in prison, and cropping a fellow's hair close to his head, unless it's in the hieroglyphics. Is 4Go4 short for lock him up? And does C85Q mean send for the hair cutter?" "Pray be serious," remonstrated Neelie. "We are both sitting on a volcano. There!" she said, pointing to the place. "Read it. If anything can bring you to a proper sense of our situation, that will." Allan cleared his throat, and Neelie held the point of her pencil ready on the depressing side of the account, otherwise the bad page of the pocket-book. "And as it is the policy of our law," Allan began, "to prevent the marriage of persons under the age of 21 without the consent of parents and guardians." Neelie made her first entry on the side of bad. "I'm only 17 next birthday, and circumstances forbid me to confide my attachment to papa. It is provided that in the case of the publication of banns of a person under 21, not being a widower or a widow, who are deemed emancipated." Neelie made another entry on the depressing side. "Allan is not a widower, and I am not a widow. Consequently, we are neither of us emancipated. If the parent or guardian openly signifies his dissent at the time the banns are published, which papa would be certain to do, such publication would be void." "I'll take a breath here, if you'll allow me," said Allan. "Blackstone might put it in shorter sentences, I think, if he can't put it in fewer words. Cheer up, Neelie! There must be ways of marrying, besides this roundabout way that ends in the publication and a void. Infernal gibberish! I could write better English myself." "We are not at the end of it yet," said Neelie. "The void is nothing to what is to come." "Whatever it is," rejoined Allan, "we'll treat it like a dose of physic. will take it at once and be done with it." He went on reading. "And no license to marry without banns shall be granted, unless oath shall first be made by one of the parties that he or she believes that there is no impediment of kindred or alliance. Well, I can take my oath on that with a safe conscience. What's next? And one of said parties must, for the space of 15 days immediately preceding such license, have had his or her usual place of abode within the parish or chapelry within which such marriage is to be solemnized. Chapelry! I'd live 15 days in a dog kennel with the greatest pleasure. I say, Neelie, all this seems like plain sailing enough. What are you shaking your head about? Go on, and I shall see. Oh, all right, I'll go on. Here we are. And where one of said parties, not being a widower or widow, shall be under the age of 21 years, oath must first be made that the consent of the person or persons whose consent is required has been obtained, or that there is no person having authority to give such consent. The consent required by this act is that of the father." At those last formidable words Allan came to a full stop. "The consent of the father," he repeated, with all needful seriousness of look and manner. "I couldn't exactly swear to that, could I?" Neelie answered in expressive silence. She handed him the pocket-book, with the final entry completed on the side of bad, in these terms: "Our marriage is impossible unless Allan commits perjury." The lovers looked at each other across the insuperable obstacle of Blackstone in speechless dismay. "Shut up the book," said Neelie, resignedly. "I have no doubt we should find the police, and the prison, and the hair-cutting, all punishments for perjury, exactly as I told you, if we looked at the next page. But we needn't trouble ourselves to look. We have found out quite enough already. It's all over with us. I must go to school on Saturday, and you must manage to forget me as soon as you can. Perhaps we may meet in after life, and you may be a widower, and I may be a widow, and the cruel law may consider us emancipated, when it's too late to be of the slightest use. By that time, no doubt, I shall be old and ugly, and you will naturally have ceased to care about me, and it will all end in the grave, and the sooner the better. Good bye," concluded Neelie, rising mournfully with the tears in her eyes. "It's only prolonging our misery to stop here, unless you have anything to propose." "I've got something to propose," cried the headlong Allan. "It's an entirely new idea. Would you mind trying the blacksmith at Gretna Green?" "No earthly consideration," answered Neelie, indignantly, "would induce me to be married by a blacksmith." "Don't be offended," pleaded Allan. "I meant it for the best. Lots of people in our situation have tried the blacksmith, and found him quite as good as a clergyman, and a most amiable man, I believe, into the bargain. Never mind. We must try another string in our bow." "We haven't got another to try," said Neelie. "Take my word for it," persisted Allan, stoutly, "there must be ways and means of circumventing Blackstone without perjury, if we only knew of them. It's a matter of law, and we must consult somebody in the profession. I dare say it's a risk, but nothing venture, nothing have. What do you say to young Pedgift? He's a thorough good fellow. I'm sure we could trust young Pedgift to keep our secret." "Not for worlds!" exclaimed Neelie. "You may be willing to trust your secrets to the vulgar little wretch. I won't have him trusted with mine. I hate him. No," she concluded, with a mounting color and a peremptory stamp of her foot on the grass, "I positively forbid you to take any of the Thorpe Ambrose people into your confidence. They would instantly suspect me, and it would be all over the place in a moment." "My attachment may be an unhappy one," remarked Neelie, with her handkerchief to her eyes, and papa may nip it in the bud, but I won't have it profaned by town gossip." "Hush, hush!" said Allan. "I won't say a word at Thorpe Ambrose. I won't indeed." He paused and considered for a moment. "There's another way," he burst out, brightening up on the instant. "We've got a whole week before us. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go to London." There was a sudden rustling, heard by neither one nor the other, among the trees behind them that screened Miss Gwilt. One more of the difficulties in her way, the difficulty of getting Allan to London, now promised to be removed by an act of Allan's own will. "To London?" repeated Neelie, looking up in astonishment. "To London," reiterated Allan. "That's far enough away from Thorpe Ambrose, surely. Wait a minute, and don't forget that this is a question of law. Very well. I know some lawyers in London, who managed all my business for me when I first came in for this property. They are just the men to consult; and if they decline to be mixed up in it, there's their head clerk, who is one of the best fellows I ever met with in my life. I asked him to go yachting with me, I remember, and though he couldn't go, he said he felt the obligation all the same. That's the man to help us. Blackstone's a mere infant to him. Don't say it's absurd. Don't say it's exactly like me. Do pray hear me out. I won't breathe your name or your father's. I'll describe you as a young lady to whom I am devotedly attached; and if my friend the clerk asks where you live, I'll say the north of Scotland, or the west of Ireland, or the Channel Islands, or anywhere else you like. My friend the clerk is a total stranger to Thorpe Ambrose and everybody in it, which is one recommendation; and in 5 minutes' time he'd put me up to what to do, which is another. If you only knew him, he's one of those extraordinary men who appear once or twice in a century, the sort of man who won't allow you to make a mistake if you try. All I have got to say to him, putting it short, is, 'My dear fellow, I want to be privately married without perjury.' All he has got to say to me, putting it short, is, 'You must do so and so, and so and so, and you must be careful to avoid this, that, and the other.' I have nothing in this world to do but to follow his directions, and you have nothing in the world to do but what the bride always does when the bridegroom is ready and willing." His arm stole around Neelie's waist, and his lips pointed the moral of the last sentence with that inarticulate eloquence which is so uniformly successful in persuading a woman against her will. All Neelie's meditated objections dwindled, in spite of her, to one feeble little question. "Suppose I allow you to go, Allan?" she whispered, toying nervously with the stud in the bosom of his shirt. "Shall you be very long away?" "I'll be off to day," said Allan, "by the 11 o'clock train, and I'll be back to morrow, if I and my friend the clerk can settle it all in time. If not, Wednesday at the latest." "You'll write to me every day?" pleaded Neelie, clinging a little closer to him. "I shall sink under the suspense if you don't promise to write to me every day." Allan promised to write twice a day if she liked. Letter writing, which was such an effort for other men, was no effort to him. "And mind, whatever those people may say to you in London," proceeded Neelie, "I insist on your coming back for me. I positively decline to run away, unless you promise to fetch me." Allan promised for the second time, on his sacred word of honor, and at the full compass of his voice. But Neelie was not satisfied even yet. She reverted to first principles, and insisted on knowing whether Allan was quite sure he loved her. Allan called Heaven to witness how sure he was, and got another question directly for his pains. Could he solemnly declare that he would never regret taking Neelie away from home? Allan called Heaven to witness again, louder than ever. All to no purpose. The ravenous female appetite for tender protestations still hungered for more. "I know what will happen one of these days," persisted Neelie. "You will see some other girl who is prettier than I am, and you will wish you had married her instead of me." As Allan opened his lips for a final outburst of asseveration, the stable clock at the great house was faintly audible in the distance, striking the hour. Neelie started guiltily. It was breakfast time at the cottage; in other words, time to take her leave. At the last moment her heart went back to her father, and her head sank on Allan's bosom as she tried to say good by. "Papa has always been so kind to me, Allan," she whispered, holding him back tremulously as he turned to leave her. "It seems so guilty and so heartless to go away from him and be married in secret. Oh, do think before you really go to London. Is there a way of making him a little kinder and juster to you?" The question was useless. The major's resolutely unfavorable reception of Allan's letter rose in Neelie's memory, and answered her as the words passed her lips. With a girl's impulsiveness, she pushed Allan away before he could speak, and signed to him impatiently to go. The conflict of contending emotions, which she had mastered thus far, burst its way outward in spite of her after he had waved his hand for the last time, and had disappeared in the depths of the dell. When she turned from the place on her side, her long restrained tears fell freely at last, and made the lonely way back to the cottage the dimmest prospect that Neelie had seen for many a long day past. As she hurried homeward, the leaves parted behind her, and Miss Gwilt stepped softly into the open space. She stood there in triumph, tall, beautiful, and resolute. Her lovely color brightened while she watched Neelie's retreating figure hastening lightly away from her over the grass. "Cry, you little fool," she said, in her quiet, clear tones, and her steady smile of contempt. "Cry as you have never cried yet. You have seen the last of your sweetheart." End of Book the Third, Chapter 11 of Armadale.
Book 3, Chapter 12 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simão. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. An hour later, the landlady at Miss Gwilt's lodgings was lost in astonishment, and the clamorous tongues of children were in a state of ungovernable revolt. Unforeseen circumstances had suddenly obliged tenants of the first floor to terminate the occupation of her apartments, and to go to London that day by the 11 o'clock train. "Please to have a fly at the door at 10:30, said Miss Gwilt, as the amazed landlady followed her upstairs. "And excuse me, you good creature, if I beg and pray not to be disturbed till the fly comes." Once inside the room, she locked the door, and then opened her writing desk. "Now for my letter to the major," she said. "How shall I word it?" A moment's consideration apparently decided her. Searching through her collection of pens, she carefully selected the worst that could be found, and began the letter by writing the date of the day on a soiled sheet of note-paper, in crooked, clumsy characters which ended in a blot made purposely with the feather of the pen. Pausing, sometimes to think a little, sometimes to make another blot, she completed the letter in these words: "Honored Sir, it is on my conscience to tell you something which I think you ought to know. You ought to know of the goings on of Miss, your daughter, with young Mr. Armadale. I wish you to make sure, and, what is more, I advise you to be quick about it, if she is going the way you want her to go, when she takes her morning walk before breakfast. I scorn to make mischief, where there is true love on both sides. But I don't think the young man means truly by Miss. What I mean is, I think Miss only has his fancy. Another person, who shall be nameless betwixt us, has his true heart. Please to pardon my not putting my name. I am only a humble person, and I might get me into trouble. This is all at present, dear sir, from yours, a well-wisher." "There," said Miss Gwilt, as she followed the letter up. "If I had been a professed novelist, I could hardly have written more naturally in the character of a servant than that." She wrote the necessary address to Major Milroy, looked admiringly for the last time at the coarse and clumsy writing which her own delicate hand had produced, and rose to post the letter herself, before she entered next on serious business of packing up. "Curious," she thought, when the letter had been posted, and she was back again making her travelling preparations in her own room. "Here I am, running headlong into a frightful risk, and I never was in better spirits in my life." The boxes were ready when the fly was at the door, and Miss Gwilt was equipped, as becomingly as usual, in her neat travelling costume. The thick veil, which she was accustomed to wear in London, appeared on her country straw bonnet for the first time. "One meets such rude men occasionally in the railway," she said to the landlady, "and though I dress quietly, my hair is so very remarkable." She was a little paler than usual, but she had never been so sweet-tempered and engaging, so gracefully cordial and friendly as now, when the moment of departure had come. The simple people of the house were quite moved at taking leave of her. She insisted on shaking hands with the landlord, on speaking to him in her prettiest way, and sunning him in her brightest smiles. "Come," she said to the landlady, "you have been so kind, you have been so like a mother to me, you must give me a kiss at parting." She embraced the children all together in the lamp, with a mixture of humor and tenderness delightful to see, and left a shilling among them to buy a cake. "If I was only rich enough to make it a sovereign," she whispered to the mother, "how glad I should be." The awkward lad who ran on errands stood waiting at the fly door. He was clumsy, he was frowsy, he had a gaping mouth and a turn-up nose, but the ineradicable female delight in being charming accepted him, for all that, in the character of a last chance. "You dear dingy John," she said kindly, at the carriage door. "I am so poor I have only sixpence to give you. With my very best wishes. Take my advice, John. Grow to be a fine man, and find yourself a nice sweetheart. Thank you for 1,000 times." She gave him a friendly little pat on the cheek with two of her gloved fingers, and smiled and nodded, and got into the fly. "Armadale next," she said to herself as the carriage drove off. Allan's anxiety not to miss the train had brought him to the station in better time than usual. After taking his ticket and putting his portmanteau under the porter's charge, he was pacing the platform and thinking of Neelie, when he heard the rustling of a lady's dress behind him, and, turning around to look, found himself face to face with Miss Gwilt. There was no escaping her this time. The station wall was on his right hand, and the line was on his left. A tunnel was behind him, and Miss Gwilt was in front, inquiring in her sweetest tones whether Mr. Armadale was going to London. Allan colored scarlet with vexation and surprise. There he was obviously waiting for the train, and there was his portmanteau close by, with his name on it, already labelled for London. What answer but the true one could he make after that? Could he let the train go without him, and lose the precious hour so vitally important to Neelie and himself? Impossible. Allan helplessly confirmed the printed statement on his portmanteau, and heartily wished himself at the other end of the world as he said the words. "How very fortunate!" rejoiced Miss Gwilt. "I am going to London too. Might I ask you, Mr. Armadale, as you seem to be quite alone, to be my escort on the journey?" Allan looked at the little assembly of travellers and travellers' friends collected on the platform near the booking-office door. They were all Thorpe Ambrose people. He was probably known by sight, and Miss Gwilt was probably known by sight to every one of them. In sheer desperation, hesitating more awkwardly than ever, he produced his cigar case. "I should be delighted," he said, with an embarrassment which was almost an insult under the circumstances. "But I'm what people who get sick over a cigar call a slave to smoking." "I delight in smoking," said Miss Gwilt, with undiminished vivacity and good humor. "It's one of the privileges of the man which I have always envied. I'm afraid, Mr. Armadale, you must think I am forcing myself on you. It certainly looks like it. The real truth is, I want particularly to say a word to you in private about Mr. Midwinter." The train came up at the same moment. Setting Midwinter out of the question, the common decencies of politeness left Allan no alternative but to submit. After having been the cause of her leaving her situation at Major Milroy's, after having pointedly avoided her only a few days since on the high road, to have declined going to London in the same carriage with Miss Gwilt would have been an act of downright brutality which it was simply impossible to commit. "Damn her!" said Allan internally, as he handed his travelling companion into an empty carriage, officiously placed at his disposal, before all the people at the station by the guard. "You shan't be disturbed, sir," the man whispered confidentially, with a smile and a touch of his hat. Allan could have knocked him down with the utmost pleasure. "Stop," he said from the window. "I don't want the carriage—" It was useless. The guard was out of hearing, the whistle blew, and the train started for London. The select assembly of travellers' friends left behind on the platform congregated in a circle on the spot, with the station-master in the centre. The station-master, otherwise Mr. Mac, was a popular character in the neighbourhood. He possessed two social qualifications which invariably impressed the average English mind. He was an old soldier, and he was a man of few words. The conclave on the platform insisted on checking his opinion, before it committed itself positively to an opinion of its own. A brisk fire of remarks exploded, as a matter of course, on all sides, but everybody's view of the subject ended interrogatively in a question aimed point-blank at the station-master's ears. "She's got him, hasn't she?" "She'll come back Mrs. Armadale, won't she?" "He'd better have stuck to Miss Milroy, hadn't he?" "Miss Milroy stuck to him? She paid him a visit at the great house, didn't she?" "Nothing of the sort. It's a shame to take the girl's character away. She was caught in a thunderstorm close by. He was obliged to give her shelter, and she's never been near the place since. Miss Gwilt's been there, if you like, with no thunderstorm to force her in. And Miss Gwilt's off with him to London in a carriage all to themselves, eh, Mr. Mac?" "Ah, he's a soft one, that Armadale, with all his money, to take up with a red-haired woman, a good 8 or 9 years older than he is. She's 30 if she's a day. That's what I say, Mr. Mac. What do you say?" "Older or younger, she'll rule the roast of Thorpe Ambrose. And I say, for the sake of the place, and for the sake of trade, let's make the best of it. And Mr. Mac, as a man of the world, sees it in the same light as I do, don't you, sir?" "Gentlemen," said the station-master, with his abrupt military accent and his impenetrable military manner, "she's a devilish fine woman, and when I was Mr. Armadale's age, it's my opinion, if her fancy had laid that way, she might have married me." With that expression of opinion, the station-master wheeled to the right, and entrenched himself impregnably in the stronghold of his own office. The citizens of Thorpe Ambrose looked at the closed door and gravely shook their heads. Mr. Magg had disappointed them. No opinion which openly recognizes the frailty of human nature is ever a popular opinion with mankind. "It's as good as saying that any of us might have married her if we had been Mr. Armadale's age." Such was the general impression on the minds of the conclave, when the meeting had been adjourned and the members were leaving the station. The last of the party to go was a slow old gentleman, with a habit of deliberately looking about him. Pausing at the door, this observant person stared up the platform and down the platform, and discovered in the latter direction, standing behind an angle of the wall, an elderly man in black, who had escaped the notice of everybody up to that time. "Why, bless my soul!" said the old gentleman, advancing inquisitively by a step at a time. "It can't be Mr. Bashwood." It was Mr. Bashwood. Mr. Bashwood, whose constitutional curiosity had taken him privately to the station, bent on solving the mystery of Allan's sudden journey to London. Mr. Bashwood, who had seen and heard behind this angle in the wall what everybody else had seen and heard, and who appeared to have been impressed by it in no ordinary way. He stood stiffly against the wall, like a man petrified, with one hand pressed on his bare head, and the other holding his head. He stood, with a dull flush on his face, and a dull stare in his eyes, looking straight into the black depths of the tunnel outside the station, as if the train to London had disappeared in it but a moment before. "Is your head bad?" asked the old gentleman. "Take my advice. Go home and lie down." Mr. Bashwood listened mechanically, with his usual attention, and answered mechanically, with his usual politeness. "Yes, sir," he said in a low, lost tone, like a man between dreaming and waking. "I'll go home and lie down." "That's right," rejoiced the old gentleman, making for the door. "And take a pill, Mr. Bashwood, take a pill." 5 minutes later, the porter charged with the business of locking up the station found Mr. Bashwood, still standing bareheaded against the wall, and still looking straight into the black depths of the tunnel, as if the train to London had disappeared in it but a moment since. "Come, sir," said the porter, "I must lock up. Are you out of sorts? Anything wrong with your inside? Try a drop of gin and bitters." "Yes," said Mr. Bashwood, answering the porter exactly as he had answered the old gentleman. "I'll try a drop of gin and bitters." The porter took him by the arm and led him out. "You'll get it there," said the man, pointing confidentially to a public house, "and you'll get it good." "I shall get it there," echoed Mr. Bashwood, still mechanically repeating what was said to him, "and I shall get it good." His will seemed to be paralyzed. His action depended absolutely on what other people told him to do. He took a few steps in the direction of the public house, hesitated, staggered, and caught at the pillar of one of the station lamps near him. The porter followed, and took him by the arm once more. "Why, you've been drinking already!" exclaimed the man, with a suddenly quickened interest in Mr. Bashwood's case. "What was it? Beer?" Mr. Bashwood, in his low, lost tones, echoed the last word. It was close on the porter's dinner time. But when the lower orders of the English people believe they have discovered an intoxicated man, their sympathy with him is boundless. The porter let his dinner take its chance, and carefully insisted Mr. Bashwood to reach the public house. "Gin and bitters will put you on your legs again. whispered the Samaritan, steady right of the alcoholic disasters of mankind. If Mr. Bashwood had really been intoxicated, the effect of the porter's remedy would have been marvelous indeed. Almost as soon as the glass was emptied, the stimulant did its work. The long weakened nervous system of the deputy steward, prostrated for the moment by the shock that had fallen on it, rallied again like a weary horse under the spur. The dull flush on his cheeks, the dull stare in his eyes, disappeared simultaneously. After a momentary effort, he recovered memory enough of what had passed to thank the porter, and ask whether he would take something himself. The worthy creature instantly accepted a dose of his own remedy, in the capacity of a preventive, and went home to dinner as only those men can go home who are physically harmed by gin and bitters, and morally elevated by the performance of a good action. Still strangely abstracted, but conscious now of the way by which he went, Mr. Bashwood left the public-house a few minutes later, in his turn. He walked on mechanically, in his dreary black garments, moving like a block on the white surface of the sun-brightened road, as Midwinter had seen him move in the early days of Thorpe Ambrose, when they had first met. Arrived at the point where he had to choose between the way that led into the town and the way that led to the great house, he stopped, incapable of deciding, and careless, apparently, even of making the attempt. "I'll be revenged on her," he whispered to himself, still absorbed in his jealous frenzy of rage against the woman who had deceived him. "I'll be revenged on her," he repeated in louder tone, "if I spend every halfpenny I've got." Some women of the disorderly sort, passing on their way to the town, heard him. "Hey, you old brute!" they called out, with the measureless license of their class. "Whatever she did, she served you right." The coarseness of the voice startled him, whether he comprehended the words or not. He shrank away from more interruption and more insult, into the quieter road that led to the great house. At the solitary place by the wayside he stopped and sat down. He took off his hat and lifted his youthful wig a little from his bald old head, and tried desperately to get beyond the one immovable conviction which lay on his mind like lead, the conviction that Miss Gwilt had been purposely deceiving him from the first. It was useless. No effort would free him from that one dominant impression, and from the one answering idea that it had evoked, the idea of revenge. He got up again, and put on his hat and walked rapidly forward a little way, then turned without knowing why, and slowly walked back again. "If I had only dressed a little smarter," said the poor wretch helplessly. "If I had only been a little bolder with her, she might have overlooked my being an old man." The angry fit returned on him. He clenched his clammy, trembling hands and shook them fiercely in the empty air. "I'll be revenged on her," he reiterated. "I'll be revenged on her if I spend every halfpenny I've got." It was terribly suggestive of the hold she had taken on him, that his vindictive sense of injury could not get far enough away from her to reach the man whom he believed to be his rival even yet. In his rage, as in his love, he was absorbed, body and soul, by Miss Gwilt. In a moment more, the noise of running wheels approaching from behind startled him. He turned and looked round. There was Mr. Pedgift, the elder, rapidly overtaking him in the gig, just as Mr. Pedgift had overtaken him once already, on that former occasion when he had listened under the window at the great house, and when the lawyer had bluntly charged him with feeling a curiosity about Miss Gwilt. In an instant the inevitable connection of ideas burst on his mind. The opinion of Miss Gwilt, which he had heard the lawyer express to Allan at parting, flashed back into his memory, side by side with Mr. Pedgift's sarcastic approval of anything in the way of inquiry which his own curiosity might obtain. "I may be even with her yet," he thought, "if Mr. Pedgift will help me. Stop, sir!" he called out desperately, as the gig came up with him. "If you please, sir, I want to speak with you." Pedgift Senior slackened the pace of his fast-trotting mare without pulling up. "Come to the office in half an hour," he said. "I'm busy now." Without waiting for an answer, without noticing Mr. Bashwood's bow, he gave the mare the rein again, and was out of sight in another minute. Mr. Bashwood sat down once more in a shady place by the roadside. He appeared to be incapable of feeling any slight but one unpardonable slight put upon him by Miss Gwilt. He not only declined to resent, he even made the best of Mr. Pedgift's unceremonious treatment of him. "Half an hour," he said resignedly. "Time enough to compose myself. And I want time. Very kind of Mr. Pedgift, though he mightn't have meant it." The sense of oppression in his head forced him once again to remove his hat. He sat with it on his lap, deep in thought, his face bent low, and the wavering fingers of one hand drumming absently on the crown of the hat. If Mr. Pedgift the elder, seeing him as he sat now, could only have looked a little way into the future, the monotonously drumming hand of the deputy steward might have been strong enough, feeble as it was, to stop the lawyer by the roadside. It was the worn, weary, miserable old hand of a worn, weary, miserable old man. But it was, for all that, to use the language of Mr. Pedgift's own parting prediction to Allan, the hand that was now destined to let the light in on Miss Gwilt. End of chapter 12. Recording by Ana Simão from Portugal. End of Armadale by Wilkie Collins.
Chapter 13, Part 1 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Book the Third, Chapter 13. An Old Man's Heart. Punctual to the moment, when the half-hour's interval had expired, Mr. Bashwood was announced at the office as waiting to see Mr. Pedgift by special appointment. The lawyer looked up from his papers with an air of annoyance. He had totally forgotten the meeting by the roadside. "See what he wants," said Pedgift Senior to Pedgift Junior, working in the same room with him. "And if it's nothing of importance, put it off to some other time." Pedgift Junior swiftly disappeared and swiftly returned. "Well?" asked the father. "Well," answered the son, "he is rather more shaky and unintelligible than usual. I can make nothing out of him, except that he persists in wanting to see you. My own idea," pursued Pedgift Junior, with his usual sardonic gravity, "is that he is going to have a fit, and that he wishes to acknowledge your uniform kindness to him by obliging you with a private view of the whole proceeding." Pedgift Senior habitually matched everybody, his son included, with their own weapons. "Be good enough to remember, Augustus," he rejoined, "that my room is not a court of law. A bad joke is not invariably followed by roars of laughter here. Let Mr. Bashwood come in." Mr. Bashwood was introduced, and Pedgift Junior withdrew. "You mustn't bleed him, sir," whispered the incorrigible joker, as he passed the back of his father's chair. "Hot water bottles to the soles of his feet, and a mustard plaster on the pit of his stomach. That's the modern treatment." "Sit down, Bashwood," said Pedgift Senior, when they were alone. And don't forget that time's money. Out with it, whatever it is, at the quickest possible rate and in the fewest possible words." These preliminary directions, bluntly but not at all unkindly spoken, rather increased than diminished the painful agitation under which Mr. Bashwood was suffering. He stammered more helplessly, he trembled more continuously than usual, as he made his little speech of thanks, and added his apologies at the end for intruding on his patron in business hours. "Everybody in the place, Mr. Pedgift, sir, knows your time is valuable." "Oh dear, yes! Oh dear, yes! Most valuable, most valuable." "Excuse me, sir, I'm coming out with it. Your goodness, or rather your business, no, your goodness gave me half an hour to wait, and I have thought of what I had to say, and prepared it, and put it short." Having got as far as that, he stopped with a pained, bewildered look. He had put it away in his memory, and now, when the time came, he was too confused to find it. And there was Mr. Pedgift, mutely waiting, his face and manner expressive alike of that silent sense of the value of his own time which every patient who has visited a great doctor, every client who has consulted a lawyer in large practice, knows so well. "Have you heard the news, sir?" stammered Mr. Bashwood, shifting his ground in despair, and letting the uppermost idea in his mind escape him, simply because it was the one idea in him that was ready to come out. "Does it concern me?" asked Pedgift Senior, mercilessly brief, and mercilessly straight in coming to the point. "It concerns a lady, sir. No, not a lady, a young man, I ought to say, in whom you used to feel some interest. Oh, Mr. Pedgift, sir, what do you think? Mr. Armadale and Miss Gwilt have gone up to London together to day. Alone, sir, alone in a carriage reserved for their two selves. Do you think he's going to marry her? Do you really think, like the rest of them, he's going to marry her?" He put the question with a sudden flush in his face and a sudden energy in his manner. His sense of the value of the lawyer's time, his conviction of the greatness of the lawyer's condescension, his constitutional shyness and timidity, all yielded together to his one overwhelming interest in hearing Mr. Pedgift's answer. He was loud for the first time in his life in putting the question. "After my experience of Mr. Armadale," said the lawyer, instantly hardening in look and manner, "I believe him to be infatuated enough to marry Miss Gwilt a dozen times over, if Miss Gwilt chose to ask him. Your news doesn't surprise me in the least, Bashwood. I'm sorry for him. I can honestly say that, though he has set my advice at defiance. And I'm more sorry still," he continued, softening again as his mind reverted to his interview with Neelie under the trees of the park. "I'm more sorry still for another person who shall be nameless. But what I have to do with all this, and what on earth is the matter with you?" he resumed, noticing for the first time the abject misery in Mr. Bashwood's manner, the blank despair in Mr. Bashwood's face, which his answer had produced. "Are you ill? Is there something behind the curtain that you are afraid to bring out? I don't understand it. Have you come here, here in my private room, in business hours, with nothing to tell me but that young Armadale has been fool enough to ruin his prospects for life? Why, I foresaw it all weeks since, and what is more, I as good as told him so at the last conversation I had with him in the great house." At those last words Mr. Bashwood suddenly rallied. The lawyer's passing reference to the great house had led him back in a moment to the purpose that he had in view. "That's it, sir," he said, eagerly. "That's what I wanted to speak to you about. That's what I've been preparing in my mind. Mr. Pedgift, sir, the last time you were at the great house, when you came away in your gig, you overtook me on the drive." "I dare say I did," remarked Pedgift, resignedly. "My mare happens to be a trifle quicker on her legs than you are on yours, Bashwood. Go on, go on. We shall come in time, I suppose, to what you are driving at." "You stopped and spoke to me, sir," proceeded Mr. Bashwood, advancing more and more eagerly to his end. "You said you suspected me of feeling some curiosity about Miss Gwilt, and you told me, I remember the exact words, sir, you told me to gratify my curiosity by all means, for you didn't object to it." Pedgift Senior began for the first time to look interested in hearing more. "I remember something of the sort," he replied. "And I also remember thinking it rather remarkable that you should happen, we won't put it in any more offensive way, to be exactly under Mr. Armadale's open window while I was talking to him. It might have been accident, of course, but it looked rather more like curiosity. I could only judge by appearances," concluded Pedgift, pointing his sarcasm with a pinch of snuff, "and appearances, Bashwood, were decidedly against you." "I don't deny it, sir. I only mentioned the circumstance because I wished to acknowledge that I was curious, and am curious, about Miss Gwilt." "Why?" asked Pedgift Senior, seeing something under the surface in Mr. Bashwood's face and manner, but utterly in the dark thus far as to what that something might be. There was silence for a moment. The moment passed. Mr. Bashwood took the refuge usually taken by nervous, unready men, placed in his circumstances, when they were at a loss for an answer. He simply reiterated the assertion that he had just made. "I feel some curiosity, sir," he said with a strange mixture of doggedness and timidity, "about Miss Gwilt." There was another moment of silence. In spite of his practised acuteness and knowledge of the world, the lawyer was more puzzled than ever. The case of Mr. Bashwood presented the one human riddle of all others which he was least qualified to solve. Though year after year, witnesses in thousands and thousands of cases, the remorseless disinheriting of nearest and nearest relations, the unnatural breaking up of sacred family ties, the deplorable severance of old and firm friendships, due entirely to the intense self-absorption which the sexual passion can produce when it enters the heart of an old man, the association of love with affirmity and grey hairs arouses, nevertheless, all the world over, no other idea than the idea of extravagant improbability or extravagant absurdity in the general mind. If the interview now taking place in Mr. Pedgift's consulting room had taken place at his dinner table instead, when wine had opened his mind to humorous influences, it is possible that he might, by this time, have suspected the truth. But, in his business hours, Pedgift Senior was in the habit of investigating men's motives seriously from the business point of view, and he was, on that very account, simply incapable of conceiving any improbability so startling, any absurdity so enormous, as the absurdity and improbability of Mr. Bashwood's being in love. Some men, in the lawyer's position, would have tried to force their way to enlightenment by obstinately repeating the unanswered question. Pedgift Senior wisely postponed the question until he had moved the conversation on another step. "Well," he resumed, "let us say you feel a curiosity about Miss Gwilt. What next?" The palms of Mr. Bashwood's hands began to moisten under the influence of his agitation, as they had moistened in the past days, when he had told the story of his domestic sorrows to Midwinter at the great house. Once more he rolled his handkerchief into a ball and dabbed it softly to and fro from one hand to the other. "May I ask if I am right, sir," he began, "in believing that you have a very unfavourable opinion of Miss Gwilt? You are quite convinced, I think." "My good fellow," interrupted Pedgift Senior, "why need you be in any doubt about it? You were under Mr. Armadale's open window all the while I was talking to him, and your ears, I presume, were not absolutely shut." Mr. Bashwood showed no sense of the interruption. The little sting of the lawyer's sarcasm was lost in the nobler pain that wrung him from the wound inflicted by Miss Gwilt. "You are quite convinced, I think, sir," he resumed, "that there are circumstances in this lady's past life which would be highly discreditable to her if they were discovered at the present time?" "The window was open at the great house, Bashwood, and your ears, I presume, were not absolutely shut." Still impenetrable to the sting, Mr. Bashwood persisted more obstinately than ever. "Unless I am greatly mistaken," he said, "your long experience in such things has even suggested to you, sir, that Miss Gwilt might turn out to be known by the police?" Pedgift Senior's patience gave way. "You've been over 10 minutes in this room," he broke out. "Can you or can you not tell me in plain English what you want?" In plain English, with the passion that had transformed him, the passion which, in Miss Gwilt's own words, had made a man of him, burning in his haggard cheeks, Mr. Bashwood met the challenge, and faced the lawyer, as the worried sheep faces the dog, on his own ground. "I wish to say, sir," he answered, "that your opinion in this matter is my opinion too. I believe there is something wrong in Miss Gwilt's past life which she keeps concealed from everybody, and I want to be the man who knows it. Pedgift Senior saw his chance, and instantly reverted to the question that he had postponed. "Why?" he asked for the second time. For the second time Mr. Bashwood hesitated. Could he acknowledge that he had been mad enough to love her, and mean enough to be a spy for her? Could he say, "She has deceived me from the first, and she has deserted me, now her object is served. After robbing me of my happiness, robbing me of my honour, robbing me of my last hope left in life, she has gone from me for ever, and left me nothing but my old man's longing, slow and sly, and strong and changeless, for revenge. Revenge that I may have, if I can poison her success by dragging her frailties into the public view. Revenge that I'll buy, for what is gold or what is life to me? With the last farthing of my hoarded memory, and the last drop of my stagnant blood." Could he say that to the man who sat waiting for his answer? No, he could only crush it down and be silent. The lawyer's expression began to harden once more. "One of us must speak out," he said, "and as you evidently won't, I will. I can only account for this extraordinary anxiety of yours to make yourself acquainted with Miss Gwilt's secrets in one of two ways. Your motive is either an excessively mean one, no offence, Bashwood, I am only putting the case, or an excessively generous one. After my experience of your honest character and your creditable conduct, it is only your due that I should absolve you at once of the mean motive. I believe you are as incapable as I am, I can say no more, of turning to mercenary account any discoveries you might make to Miss Gwilt's prejudice in Miss Gwilt's past life. Shall I go on any further? Or would you prefer, on second thoughts, opening your mind frankly to me of your own accord?" "I should prefer not interrupting you, sir," said Mr. Bashwood. "As you please," pursued Pedgift Senior. "Having absolved you of the mean motive, I come to the generous motive next. It is possible that you are an unusually grateful man, and it is certain that Mr. Armadale has been remarkably kind to you. After employing you under Mr. Midwinter in the steward's office, he has had confidence enough in your honesty and your capacity, now his friend has left him, to put his business entirely and unreservedly in your hands. It's not in my experience of human nature, but it may be possible, nevertheless, that you are so gratefully sensible of that confidence, and so gratefully interested in your employer's welfare, that you can't see him, in his friendless position, going straight to his own disgrace and ruin, without making an effort to save him. To put it in two words, is it your idea that Mr. Armadale might be prevented from marrying Miss Gwilt, if he could be informed in time of her real character? And do you wish to be the man who opens his eyes to the truth? If that is the case—" He stopped in astonishment. Acting under some uncontrollable impulse, Mr. Bashwood had started to his feet. He stood, with his withered face lit up by a sudden irradiation from within, which made him look younger than his age by a good 20 years. He stood, gasping for breath enough to speak, and gesticulated entreatingly at the lawyer with both hands. "Say it again, sir!" he burst out, eagerly, recovering his breath before Pedgift Senior had recovered his surprise. "The question about Mr. Armadale, sir! Only once more, Mr. Pedgift, please!" With his practised observation closely and distrustfully at work on Mr. Bashwood's face, Pedgift Senior motioned to him to sit down again, and put the question for the second time. "Do I think," said Mr. Bashwood, repeating the sense, but not the words of the question, "that Mr. Armadale might be parted from Miss Gwilt if she could be shown to him as she really is? Yes, sir! And do I wish to be the man who does it? Yes, sir! Yes, sir! Yes, sir!" "It is rather strange," remarked the lawyer, looking at him more and more distrustfully, "that you should be so violently agitated simply because my question happens to have hit the mark." The question happened to have hit a mark which Pedgift little dreamed of. It had released Mr. Bashwood's mind in an instant from the dead pressure of his one dominant idea of revenge, and had shown him a purpose to be achieved by the discovery of Miss Gwilt's secrets, which had never occurred to him till that moment. The marriage which he had blindly regarded as inevitable was a marriage that might be stopped, not in Allan's interest, but in his own, and the woman whom he believed that he had lost might yet, in spite of circumstances, be a woman won. His brain whirled as he thought of it. His own aroused resolution almost daunted him by its terrible incongruity with all the familiar habits of his mind, and all the customary proceedings of his life. Finding his last remark unanswered, Pedgift Senior considered a little before he said anything more. "One thing is clear," reasoned the lawyer with himself. "His true motive in this matter is a motive which he is afraid to avow. My question evidently offered him a chance of misleading me, and he has accepted it on the spot. That's enough for me. If I was Mr. Armadale's lawyer, the mystery might be worth investigating. As things are, it's no interest of mine to hunt Mr. Bashwood from one lie to another till I run him to earth at last. I have nothing whatever to do with it, and I shall leave him free to follow his own roundabout courses, in his own roundabout way." Having arrived at that conclusion, Pedgift Senior pushed back his chair, and rose briskly to terminate the interview. "Don't be alarmed, Bashwood," he began. "The subject of our conversation is a subject exhausted, so far as I am concerned. I have only a few last words to say, and it's a habit of mine, as you know, to say my last words on my legs. Whatever else I may be in the dark about, I have made one discovery, at any rate. I have found out what you really want with me, at last. You want me to help you." "If you would be so very, very kind, sir," stammered Mr. Bashwood. "If you would only give me the great advantage of your opinion and advice." "Wait a bit, Bashwood. We will separate those two things, if you please. A lawyer may offer an opinion like any other man, but when a lawyer gives his advice, by the Lord Harry, sir, it's professional. You're welcome to my opinion in this matter. I have disguised it from nobody. I believe there have been events in Miss Gwilt's career which, if they could be discovered, would even make Mr. Armadale, infatuated as he is, afraid to marry her, supposing, of course, that he really is going to marry her; for, though the appearances are in favour of it so far, it is only an assumption after all. As to the mode of proceeding by which the blots on this woman's character might or might not be brought to light in time, she may be married by license in a fortnight if she likes. That is a branch of the question on which I positively decline to enter. It implies speaking in my character as a lawyer, and giving you, what I decline positively to give you, my professional advice." "Oh, sir, don't say that!" pleaded Mr. Bashwood. "Don't deny me the great favour, the inestimable advantage of your advice. I have such a poor head, Mr. Pedgift. I'm so old and so slow, sir, and I get so sadly startled and worried when I'm thrown out of my ordinary ways. It's quite natural you should be a little impatient with me for taking up your time. I know that time is money, to a clever man like you. Would you please excuse me, if I venture to say that I have saved a little something, a few pounds, sir, and being quite lonely, with nobody dependent on me, I'm sure I may spend my savings as I please." Blind to every consideration but the one consideration of propitiating Mr. Pedgift, he took out a dingy, ragged old pocket-book, and tried, with trembling fingers, to open it on the lawyer's table. "Put your pocket-book back directly," said Pedgift Senior. "Richer men than you have tried that argument with me, and have found that there is such a thing, off the stage, as a lawyer who is not to be bribed. I will have nothing to do with the case, under existing circumstances. If you want to know why, I beg to inform you that Miss Gwilt ceased to be professionally interesting to me on the day when I ceased to be Mr. Armadale's lawyer. I may have other reasons besides, which I don't think it necessary to mention. The reason already given is explicit enough. Go your own way, and take your responsibility on your own shoulders. You may venture within reach of Miss Gwilt's claws and come out again without being scratched. Time will show. In the meanwhile, I wish you good morning, and I own, to my shame, that I never knew till to-day what a hero you were." This time Mr. Bashwood felt the sting. Without another word of expostulation or entreaty, without even saying good morning on his side, he walked to the door, opened it softly, and left the room. Chapter 13.